In the cold corridors of English history, among tales of blood and betrayal, the fate of the two young princes, Edward V and his younger brother Richard, Duke of York, stands as one of the most chilling, unsolved horrors. The story begins not in the shadows of the Tower, but in the glittering royal court of King Edward IV, the first Yorkist king of England, whose strength on the battlefield had secured a fragile peace in a land torn apart by civil war. His rule brought a temporary lull in the brutal Wars of the Roses, a conflict that had painted English soil red with the blood of Lancastrians and Yorkists alike. But his sudden death in 1483 reopened the floodgates of ambition, treachery, and darkness. He left behind a 12-year-old son, Edward, who would never truly wear the crown placed upon his head. Edward V was born into power but destined for misfortune. His birth on November 2, 1470, came at a time when his father was in exile and his mother, Elizabeth Woodville, sought sanctuary in Westminster Abbey. The boy was barely a year old when Edward IV reclaimed the throne, making his son the Prince of Wales and sending him to Ludlow Castle to learn the arts of governance and warfare. Under the tutelage of loyal nobles, including his maternal uncle Anthony Woodville, Lord Rivers, the young prince was groomed for rule. But no amount of preparation could shield him from the twisted coils of betrayal that awaited. When Edward IV died suddenly on April 9, 1483, the kingdom was thrust into uncertainty. The young Edward, not yet crowned, was the heir apparent, but power vacuums are dangerous places, and England in the 15th century was no place for innocence. As the news of the king's death spread, Queen Elizabeth acted swiftly to consolidate control. She summoned her family and allies to her side, while young Edward was ordered to travel from Ludlow to London to prepare for his coronation. But the wheels of fate were already spinning against him. Richard, Duke of Gloucester, the boy's paternal uncle, was named Lord Protector in Edward IV's will, a title that gave him temporary power over the realm until the prince came of age. A brilliant warrior and a man with a reputation for loyalty, Richard had served his brother faithfully. But now, he harbored dark ambitions. Meeting the young king's entourage at Stony Stratford, Richard seized Lord Rivers and other loyalists, accusing them of treason. Edward, confused and grieving, was escorted under the guise of protection toward London, and toward the Tower. The Tower of London in the 15th century was not just a prison. It was a fortress, an armory, and a royal residence. Many kings before Edward had stayed there before their coronations. But for Edward and Richard, the Tower would become a tomb, a place where innocence would be swallowed by ambition and forgotten by the world. On May 19, 1483, Edward entered the Tower. Soon afterward, his brother Richard, aged 9, joined him. At first, the princes appeared in public. They were seen playing in the gardens, waving to the crowds. But by the summer of 1483, they vanished. Their appearances ceased. The windows of their chambers grew dark. Whispers grew louder, rumors darker. And England trembled as the truth slipped away into silence. Meanwhile, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, acted with swift brutality. He declared that Edward IV's marriage to Elizabeth Woodville had been invalid due to a prior contract, rendering his children illegitimate. Parliament passed the Titulus Regius, a document that gave Richard legal grounds to seize the throne. On July 6, 1483, he was crowned King Richard III. To those watching, it was a bloodless coup. But beneath the polished stone of Westminster, the screams of the past echoed, unheard. For the boys, true heirs by blood, were no longer seen, no longer heard, no longer safe. The mystery of their disappearance was never officially solved. There were no bodies, no confessions, no public mourning. Only silence. Many believed they had been murdered, smothered in their sleep by agents of the new king. Others whispered that the Duke of Buckingham, once Richard's ally, had acted on his own. And yet others believed that Henry Tudor, future Henry VII, had them killed to secure his own claim. Whatever the truth, the Tower of London became a tomb without bones, a house of royal silence. In centuries to come, children would sing of the princes lost in the Tower. Poets would mourn them, and historians would argue endlessly over who had blood on their hands. In 1674, nearly 2 centuries later, workmen renovating the White Tower uncovered a wooden box beneath a staircase. Inside were the remains of 2 small skeletons. Though no forensic tests existed at the time, it was widely believed that these were the bones of Edward and Richard. King Charles II ordered that they be buried with honor in Westminster Abbey. Yet even that resting place failed to bring certainty. In the 1930s, an examination of the bones raised more questions than answers. Were they truly the princes? Or another pair of forgotten children, lost to plague or fate? The darkness surrounding the fate of Edward V and his brother has never lifted. They were symbols of innocence destroyed by ambition, pawns in a game they could not comprehend. Their legacy is not just of royal blood but of silence, suspicion, and sorrow. To this day, their story haunts the stones of the Tower and the annals of England. Every brick whispers betrayal. Every corridor remembers the footsteps of two boys who entered history as heirs and vanished into horror. But their tale does not end here. In the next part, we will dive deeper into the twisted politics that enabled Richard III's rise, the figures who may have conspired to kill the princes, and the chilling theories of torture, execution, and manipulation behind the shadows of the Tower. Prepare for Part 2: Bloodlines and Betrayals as we journey further into one of history's most unsettling royal nightmares. Duo. To understand the betrayal that befell Edward V and his younger brother Richard, one must first navigate the blood-soaked web of medieval English politics, where loyalty shifted with the wind and ambition sharpened the blades. When King Edward IV died in April 1483, his son was merely 12 years old, a boy groomed for kingship but still vulnerable to the ravenous appetite for power that consumed the nobility. Richard, Duke of Gloucester, brother to the late king and now the Lord Protector, swore to defend the boy king's claim. Yet within weeks, that oath was shattered. The machinery of betrayal began slowly, methodically, and with surgical precision. It was not merely a usurpation, it was a carefully staged political dismemberment of the House of York from within its very walls. The downfall began with the swift arrest of Lord Rivers, the Queen's brother and guardian of the young Edward, and Sir Richard Grey, the Queen's son from a previous marriage. They were executed on charges of conspiracy without any formal trial, an ominous sign that Richard's actions would not be tempered by law or tradition. As the Queen retreated into sanctuary at Westminster Abbey with her remaining children, Richard consolidated his power in London. He surrounded the Tower with loyal troops and silenced dissent. Yet what unfolded next was not a coup by force, it was a manipulation of legitimacy. Richard presented an argument that Edward IV had been pre-contracted to another woman before marrying Elizabeth Woodville, rendering all their children illegitimate. This stunning claim was supported by Bishop Robert Stillington, a man whose motives remain murky but whose testimony would change history. Parliament, cowed or complicit, passed the Titulus Regius, and Richard claimed the throne. In a matter of weeks, the rightful heir, Edward V, had become a royal ghost. As King Richard III walked the marble halls of Westminster, few dared to question the whereabouts of the princes. But in hushed whispers behind drawn curtains, the question echoed louder than any proclamation: where were Edward and Richard? They had last been seen in the Tower in late summer. One witness claimed to have seen them playing. Another said they were reading together. Then, nothing. Their light extinguished, their presence erased. It was as though history itself had turned its back on them. The Tower, a fortress of kings, became a crypt of secrets. Suspicion quickly fell upon Richard III. It seemed almost impossible that the boys could have been murdered in the most secure place in England without his knowledge or consent. Some chroniclers claimed they were smothered with pillows in their sleep, others that they were poisoned or starved. The names of their potential executioners haunt the pages of history like shadows: Sir James Tyrrell, a loyal servant to Richard; Sir Robert Brackenbury, Constable of the Tower; and even the Duke of Buckingham, a former ally whose ambition rivaled Richard's own. None were ever tried. None confessed in any verifiable way. Yet the guilt hung over Richard like a ghost's breath, staining every gesture, every word, with the invisible ink of blood. The Duke of Buckingham, once a fervent supporter of Richard's claim, turned against him that same year. He rebelled in the name of Henry Tudor, the distant Lancastrian claimant exiled in France. Why the sudden change of heart? Many historians believe that Buckingham had knowledge, or even played a role, in the disappearance of the princes. Perhaps he had expected to be rewarded for silencing them and was betrayed. Perhaps he had acted independently, seeing the boys as a threat to his own ambitions. Regardless, his rebellion failed, and he was swiftly executed. But his death left questions unanswered and added another body to the trail of suspicion. Meanwhile, Henry Tudor, exiled in Brittany, watched England unravel. The disappearance of the princes gave him the perfect propaganda tool. He vowed to marry their eldest sister, Elizabeth of York, thereby uniting the warring houses of York and Lancaster. But he also accused Richard III of murdering the princes, a charge that resonated deeply with a public increasingly uneasy with their king's legitimacy. As Tudor forces prepared for invasion, the princes remained unaccounted for. Whether buried in secret beneath the tower or hidden elsewhere, their fate became a phantom weapon wielded by their enemies and mourned by the people. In the midst of this power struggle, Elizabeth Woodville made a stunning move. Having spent months in sanctuary, she emerged and offered her support to Henry Tudor. A mother who once trusted the House of York now placed her hopes in a Lancastrian exile. She must have believed that her sons were dead, or feared that their survival would bring only further suffering. In either case, her shift marked a pivotal point. The Yorkist queen was now preparing to become the mother-in-law to a Lancastrian king. And in doing so, she all but confirmed what many had suspected. The princes were not missing, they were murdered. As 1485 dawned, Richard III faced growing discontent. Though he had attempted reforms and presented himself as a just ruler, the specter of the Tower loomed behind him. The Battle of Bosworth on August 22, 1485, ended not only his reign but his life. Struck down in battle, abandoned by key allies, Richard's death marked the end of the Plantagenet dynasty. Henry Tudor became Henry VII and married Elizabeth of York, fulfilling his promise to unite the houses. But though peace was restored, the ghosts of the princes were far from laid to rest. Henry VII's reign brought no official investigation into the fate of Edward and Richard. Perhaps he feared what might be found, or who might be implicated. Instead, he allowed the mystery to fester, using it to his advantage but never resolving it. In 1502, Sir James Tyrrell, while imprisoned for another alleged conspiracy, was said to have confessed to murdering the princes on Richard III's orders. But this confession was never made public, never verified, and never fully documented. Was it real, or a fabrication to cement Henry's legitimacy by smearing the Yorkist legacy? Meanwhile, imposters emerged. The most famous was Perkin Warbeck, who claimed to be Richard, Duke of York. He gained considerable support across Europe and led a failed invasion before being captured and executed. Was he truly an impostor? Or had one of the princes somehow survived? No one could say for certain. The line between reality and myth had blurred. The truth had been buried too deeply beneath layers of fear, betrayal, and time. For centuries, the Tower of London has stood as a silent witness. Tourists wander its halls, historians study its secrets, and the bones found in 1674 remain interred in Westminster Abbey. In 1933, those bones were examined by scientists who concluded that they belonged to children roughly the same age as the princes. Yet the evidence was inconclusive. Without modern DNA testing, blocked by royal decree, we cannot know if they truly belong to Edward and Richard. And so, the silence remains. A silence that speaks louder than any confession. The fate of the princes in the Tower is not just a historical mystery, it is a story of how power corrupts, how innocence is vulnerable in the face of ambition, and how history can be manipulated, rewritten, or buried. In the struggle for the English throne, two young boys became collateral damage. Their names became whispers, their deaths, a tool, and their legacy, a chilling reminder that, even in the grandeur of royal palaces, horror finds a home. But even this is not the end. In the final chapter of this documentary, we will explore the forensic investigations, the cultural obsession with the princes' disappearance, and the lasting imprint of their deaths on English monarchy, literature, and the national conscience. Stay with us as we conclude this descent into royal horror in Part 3: Echoes in the Stone, the Legacy of the Lost Princes. The bones were discovered in 1674. Buried beneath a stone staircase in the Tower of London, they were small, fragile, and fragmented. Two skeletons, intertwined as if still seeking solace from a death that came too soon. Workers, demolishing a portion of the White Tower, stumbled upon the chilling find and immediately suspected what England had long feared. The princes in the Tower had been murdered and hidden beneath the very fortress meant to protect them. King Charles II ordered the bones to be placed in Westminster Abbey, where they remain to this day, in an urn inscribed simply and eerily. These bones are believed to be those of Edward V and Richard, Duke of York. Yet even in death, the princes found no peace. Centuries later, in 1933, The bones were examined by osteologist Lawrence Tanner and Professor William Wright. Their findings suggested that the remains belonged to two boys, consistent in age with Edward and Richard. Yet the examination was incomplete. No DNA tests were conducted. Such techniques didn't yet exist, and the bones had been moved, damaged, and contaminated by time. Though many accepted the conclusion, others were skeptical. Skeletal analysis can be misleading. The gender, age, and identity of the remains could not be verified with certainty. Was this science, or speculation? The case for DNA resurfaced in the 1990s and again in the 2000s. With advancements in forensic analysis and mitochondrial DNA testing, scientists proposed that the remains be re-examined and compared to known Plantagenet descendants. But the royal family declined. Official permission was denied by Queen Elizabeth II, citing respect for the dead and concerns over setting a precedent. The refusal only deepened the mystery. What was being protected? Historical integrity, or political image? In the absence of hard proof, conspiracy theories thrived like ivy on the tower's cold stones. Among the most controversial theories is that the boys were never murdered at all. Some believe that Richard III may have spirited them away to a secret location, perhaps abroad or to a remote English estate, to prevent assassination by other claimants. This theory gained some traction from the rise of Perkin Warbeck in the 1490s, a young man who claimed he was Richard, Duke of York, the younger of the two princes. His lightness, mannerisms, and knowledge of court life shocked the English and unsettled Henry VII. Warbeck was embraced by several European monarchs and even led an attempted invasion of England. Though captured and eventually executed, his claim was never definitively disproven. Was he truly an impostor, or a lost prince returned from exile? Henry VII treated Warbeck with both fear and caution. He paraded him publicly, forced confessions from him, and kept him under tight surveillance for years before executing him. Some historians argue that Henry's obsession with Warbeck betrayed a deeper truth, perhaps even fear that the young man's claim was genuine. After all, a surviving prince would have undermined Henry's entire claim to the throne. If even one of the boys lived, it would have made Henry an illegitimate usurper and stained the entire Tudor legacy. In silencing Warbeck, was he silencing history? Then there is the haunting question of why no one was ever formally charged or punished for the murder of the princes. Even in the bloody world of English succession, such an act should have demanded retribution. Yet no trials were held. No names were spoken in Parliament. Richard III never issued a proclamation acknowledging their deaths or blaming others. This eerie silence speaks volumes. Whether guilty or not, Richard understood that the boy's disappearance was an unerasable stain, one that would define his reign and eclipse any good he had attempted. His defeat at Bosworth was not just military, it was moral. The people of England did not forgive a king who could not account for the fate of two innocent children. Over time, the princes became more than victims. They became symbols of lost innocence, royal corruption, and the fragility of truth in a world ruled by power. Their story inspired playwrights, poets, and painters. William Shakespeare immortalized their fate in Richard III, painting the titular king as a twisted villain who murdered his nephews to seize the throne. While dramatic and theatrical, Shakespeare's account shaped public perception for centuries. The image of Richard III as a hunchbacked tyrant, smothering sleeping children in the dead of night, became one of literature's most enduring portrayals of evil. It was not just drama, it was damnation. Yet even this image has been questioned in modern times. The Richard III Society, formed in 1924, seeks to rehabilitate the king's reputation. They argue that there is no concrete evidence linking him to the murders, that he ruled justly and efficiently, and that history has been unfairly shaped by Tudor propaganda. After all, it was the Tudors who had the most to gain from painting Richard as a child killer. If Richard's reign could be stained with blood, then Henry VII's rise would seem like divine justice. Was Richard truly a monster, or merely a victim of history's victors? In 2012, the remains of Richard III were found beneath a parking lot in Leicester, exhumed and identified via DNA analysis. It was a sensational discovery, one that reignited debates over his legacy. But while Richard's bones were found and buried with honor, the princes remained silent. Still interred in the abbey, still denied modern analysis, they remain ghosts in a gilded cage. The irony is cruel. England's most maligned king is given closure, while its most tragic victims are denied even truth. The story of the princes in the tower has left deep scars on the British psyche. Every generation seems to revisit the mystery, hoping to find new answers. Documentaries, novels, and academic works continue to examine every clue, every rumor. But the tower itself holds its secrets close. The cold walls, the narrow staircases, the hidden chambers, all seem to whisper fragments of a truth too terrible to tell. Children's laughter echoes faintly in the stones, interrupted by a silence that has lasted over 500 years. In the end, what makes the story so chilling is not just the possibility of murder. It is the erasure, the systematic removal of two boys, not just from the world, but from the record. No funeral, no witness, no justice, just silence, and then the rewriting of history to fill the void. In this way, the princes in the tower are not just historical figures. They are warnings. Warnings about the dangers of unchecked power, about the fragility of memory, and about how easily truth can be buried under ambition and stone. So as we close this three-part descent into the horror of royal betrayal, we are left not with answers, but with shadows. Shadows of a crown never worn, a throne never claimed, and lives never lived. Edward V and Richard of Shrewsbury may have been princes, but their story belongs to the realm of ghosts. They were the rightful heirs. They were the future of a dynasty. They were the princes in the tower. You've just witnessed one of the darkest punishments in history. But many more still lurk in the shadows. So if you dare, subscribe to Torture Vault, where every scream from the past still echoes.